Ooh. Uh-oh. Ta-da! Hey everyone, thank you for joining me today. We're going to do another coloring from my fantasy coloring book. This is page 2. The fantasy coloring book is available in my Etsy store at ericperkinsart.etsy.com. And today we're going to do what I'm calling Basic Plus Coloring. Basic Plus Coloring uses 3 hues, the black lines or added black, and the white of the paper to create a volume, 3D looking or somewhat 3D looking coloring aspect. To demonstrate the Basic Plus coloring, I'm creating this sphere in my sketchbook with some colored pencils. I'm still using those Koh-I-Noor colored pencils. It's a 12-pack set, so I have a very limited color range. But I'm going to do this sphere in green, and so I'm using dark green, a light green, a yellow, and I have to use black, the actual black colored pencil, but I'm also allowing some of the page white to show through to create sort of a 3D effect on this sphere. And this is how we're going to color everything in Basic Plus, and we'll continue to that after this short demonstration. Note that if you are using a larger selection of colors, you won't have to work at blending your colors quite as much. So the first thing that I do, I tend to work from the background to the foreground, but I lay in a base color for the sky, blue for the sky, brown for the wood of the ship, green in the water, and I believe brown or violet in the mountains and stuff back in the background. Working on the paladin in the front or in the foreground. I'm working on her armor. Using violet for the darker areas of the armor. I'm going to use dark blue and light blue, leaving small amounts of white for highlights. And as I go through, I'm also going to bring in some black to actually create like a penumbra shadow or a hard shadow area, on the other side of which is going to be a backlight or like a backlight or a reflected light. Now I'm going to start doing some of the trim, and so I've decided this armor is going to have gold trim, and I'm doing that with 3 colors as well. We're going to use yellow, orange, and brown. As I moved into the leg armor, I decided to try using some more of the black, creating sort of a gray, like a gray shaded, gray scale base to color on. And I found that I liked that a little bit more for the armor because it kind of dulled down the color. But of course, if you don't want dull colors, don't do that. But as far as like a little bit more of a realistic blue armor tone, I thought it looked really good. Getting into the paladin's under armor area, so the area around her hips, her thighs, her hand, in those areas, I decided I'm going to go with a sort of a scale mail. And so I'm going to texture using the colored pencils by just creating texture as I go. But to begin with, I'm using black and marking out all of the darkest areas, adding in some slight cast shadows from the plate armor that sits over the top, and working my way through before switching over to a little bit of brown in the black to help tone down the color even more. And then I went to the dark green, laying in the dark hue, switching to the light green to get to the lighter hue. And I left very little white in this area because I don't want it to be too shiny. But then I would add in the markings for the scale mail using black in the very dark areas, dark green in the darker and mid areas, and the light green in the lighter areas to create a varying a varying amount of darkness to those scales as they progress through the armor. Going through the sword, I basically use all the same colors as I did in the armor, and moving on to the paladin's skin. Um, I decided to give her a little bit more of a fleshy tone in this one, so I'm using a little bit of violet to tone in the dark shadows, using the brown to kind of bring those shadows in a bit more, and then moving on to yellow to mix with the brown, and using white to just kind of smudge everything together. And anywhere that I need a little bit more color in the shadows, I bring the violet back in, and maybe just a touch of red for like the kind of like blood showing through the cheeks and in the ears. And of course, which colors you choose to use are going to depend largely on what color you want your paladin to be. Going into the hair, I'm using a mix of violet and red, and I think I only used two colors there, just the violet and the red, to give her sort of like red hair. And then I bounce over to the dwarf fighter and start coloring him. Now, working on the flesh for the dwarf, I wanted to make him a little bit more swarthy looking, like he works with stuff in a hot environment or whatever. So I'm using a mix of red, brown, blue, and using the white to smear his skin tone. I might even use a little bit of yellow, but very sparingly. Into the hair, I use mainly just black with a little bit of violet. Now moving into the dwarf's armor, I'm going to use a lot of black to create the shadow areas, and create sort of a grayscale, just like what I was doing with the paladin's armor. But then I'm making his armor red, so I'll use the black for the shadow areas, and then use my red to tone it in. Two colors. I'm using just the black to create a gray, and then the red to create the main color of his armor, and letting it fade to white for any highlight areas. Once I decide to start working on the trim of the dwarf's armor, I decide I'm going to use purple for that, or violet, and so I use violet with the dark blue, and just create little gradations there, leaving paper white at the small highlight areas that I think the light would catch the most. Working on the leather of the dwarf, like his boots, I used just black and brown, so coloring things in with kind of a grayscale and taking the brown, and I didn't want to leave any highlights there, so I just kind of let it get lighter without leaving the actual white of the page. Now for the pants, I actually laid in violet to create sort of a violet color there, and then laid black over that to darken up the shadow areas of the pants. Working on this first plank of the ship deck boards, I decided to first start by stroking in some of the wood grain with purple or violet, and then I laid down yellow. I didn't like the way that this board came out looking with the yellow in it, so I don't really do that again. But it is a way that you can create more of a rich yellowish texture or color in your wood. But anyways, I used the violet, and then black for any really dark lines, a little bit of brown, and then lay in brown to shade the whole thing in. And I just repeat this for every board as we go along throughout the rest of the deck. Now that I've determined my light source and colored the rest of the image according to that, I'm going to start laying in shadows, starting with the dwarf, and I'm going to do that with my black, using a fairly light touch to put in a general black area, and then I'm going to use violet to to color that in and just kind of work with it to create a shadow that looks appropriate. But yeah, so I'm using black and violet to create the shadows on underneath the dwarf. And continuing on with the deck boards, I start by laying in my violet, creating shadows and adding additional wood texture that wasn't drawn in with the ink in the original drawing. And then once I've got that laid in, I'm using black to create the darker texture lines, and of course coloring in with brown. And that concludes our video on Basic Color Plus. This page took me about 4 hours to color total, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I'm really excited to break out my castle art colors for the next video. Do that. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you'd like to get a copy of the fantasy coloring book, you can get it off of my Etsy store. It is available in printed formats, and you can download it as a PDF and print it yourself. Also, thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Your support really helps. If you liked the video, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, share the video with others.